us on, with a silent benediction, to the lobby, whence, when I had handed my stick to a bald-headed demigod and received a talismanic disc in exchange, we entered the enormous rotunda of the reading-room. I have often thought that, if some lethal vapor of highly preservative properties, such as formaldehyde, for instance, could be shed into the atmosphere of this apartment, the entire and complete collection of books and bookworms would be well worth preserving, for the enlightenment of posterity, as a sort of anthropological appendix to the main collection of the museum. For surely nowhere else in the world are so many strange and abnormal human beings gathered together in one place. And a curious question that must have occurred to many observers is, whence do these singular creatures come, and whither do they go when the very distinct-faced clock, adjusted to literary eyesight, proclaims closing time? The tragic-faced gentleman, for instance, with the corkscrew ringlets that bob up and down like spiral springs as he walks, or the short, elderly gentleman in the black cassock and bowler hat, who shatters your nerves by turning suddenly and revealing himself as a middle-aged woman. Whither do they go? One never sees them elsewhere. Do they steal away at closing time into the depths of the museum and hide themselves until morning in sarcophagi or mummy cases? Or do they creep through spaces in the bookshelves and spend the night behind the volumes in a congenial atmosphere of leather and antique paper? Who can say? What I do know is that when Ruth Bellingham entered the reading-room, she appeared in comparison with these like a creature of another order, even as the head of Antinous, which formerly stood (it has since been moved) amidst the portrait busts of the Roman emperors, seemed like the head of a god set in a portrait gallery of illustrious baboons. "What have we got to do?" I asked, when we had found a vacant seat. "Do you want to look up the catalogue?" "No, I have the tickets in my bag. The books are waiting in the kept books department." I placed my hat on the leather-covered shelf, dropped her gloves into it. How delightfully intimate and companionable it seemed! Altered the numbers on the tickets, and then we proceeded together to the kept books desk to collect the volumes that contained the material for our day's work. It was a blissful afternoon. 2½ hours of happiness unalloyed did I spend at that shiny leather-clad desk, guiding my nimble pen across the pages of the notebook. It introduced me to a new world, a world in which love and learning, sweet intimacy and crusted archaeology were mingled into the oddest, most whimsical, and most delicious confection that the mind of man can conceive. Hitherto these recondite histories had been far beyond my ken. Of the wonderful heretic Amenhotep IV I had already heard. At the most he had been a mere name, the Hittites a mythical race of undetermined habitat, while cuneiform tablets had presented themselves to my mind merely as an uncouth kind of fossil biscuit suited to the digestion of a prehistoric ostrich. Now all this was changed. As we sat with our chairs creaking together and she whispered the story of those stirring times into my receptive ear (talking is strictly forbidden in the reading-room), the disjointed fragments arranged themselves into a romance of supreme fascination. Egyptian, Babylonian, Aramean, Hittite, Memphis, Babylon, Hamath, Megiddo. I swallowed them all thankfully, wrote them down, and asked for more. Only once did I disgrace myself. An elderly clergyman of ascetic and acidulous aspect had passed us with a glance of evident disapproval, clearly setting us down as intruding philanderers, and when I contrasted the parson's probable conception of the whispered communications that were being poured into my ear so tenderly and confidentially with the dry reality, I chuckled aloud. But my fair task-mistress only paused, with her finger on the page, smilingly to rebuke me, and then went on with the dictation. She was certainly a Tartar for work. It was a proud moment for me when, in response to my interrogative "Yes," my companion said, "That is all," and closed the book. We had extracted the pith and marrow of 6 considerable volumes in 2½ hours. "You have been better than your word," she said. "It would have taken me 2 full days of really hard work to make the notes that you have written down since we commenced. I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need to. I've enjoyed myself and polished up my shorthand. What is the next thing? We shall want some books for tomorrow, shan't we?" "Yes, I have made out a list. So if you will come with me to the catalogue desk, I will look up the numbers and ask you to write the tickets." The selection of a fresh batch of authorities occupied us for another quarter of an hour, and then, Having handed in the volumes that we squeezed dry, we took our way out of the reading room. "Which way shall we go?" she asked as we passed out of the gate, where stood a massive policeman, like the guardian angel at the gate of paradise, only, thank heaven, he bore no flaming sword forbidding re-entry. "We are going," I replied, "to Museum Street, where is a milk shop in which one can get an excellent cup of tea." She looked as if she would have demurred, but eventually followed obediently, and we were soon settled side by side at the little marble-topped table, retracing the ground we had covered in the afternoon's work, and discussing various points of interest over a joint teapot. "Have you been doing this sort of work long?" I asked, as she handed me my second cup of tea. "Professionally," she answered, "only about 2 years, since we broke up our home, in fact. But long before that I used to come to the museum with my Uncle John, the one who disappeared, you know, in that dreadfully mysterious way, and help him to look up references. We were good friends, he and I." "I suppose he was a very learned man?" I suggested. "Yes, in a certain way. In the way of the better class collector he was very learned indeed. He knew the contents of every museum in the world, in so far as they were connected with Egyptian antiquities, and had studied them specimen by specimen. Consequently, as Egyptology is largely a museum science, he was a learned Egyptologist. But his real interest was in things rather than events. Of course he knew a great deal, a very great deal, about Egyptian history, but still he was, before all, a collector." "And what will happen to his collection if he is really dead?" "The greater part of it goes to the British Museum by his will, and the remainder he has left to his solicitor, Mr. Jellicoe." "To Mr. Jellicoe? Why, what will Mr. Jellicoe do with Egyptian antiquities?" "Oh, he is an Egyptologist too, and quite an enthusiast. He has really a fine collection of scarabs and other small objects such as it is possible to keep in a private house. I have always thought that it was his enthusiasm for everything Egyptian that brought him and my uncle together on terms of such intimacy, though I believe he is an excellent lawyer, and he is certainly a very discreet, cautious man." "Is he? I shouldn't have thought so, judging by your uncle's will." "Oh, that is not Mr. Jellicoe's fault. He assures us that he entreated my uncle to let him draw up a fresh document with more reasonable provisions. But he says Uncle John was immovable, and he really was a rather obstinate man. Mr. Jellicoe repudiates any responsibility in the matter. He washes his hands of the whole affair, and says that it is the will of a lunatic. And so it is. I was glancing through it only a night or two ago, and really I cannot conceive how a sane man could have written such nonsense." "You have a copy, then?" I asked eagerly, remembering Thorndyke's parting instructions. "Yes, would you like to see it? I know my father has told you about it, and it is worth reading as a curiosity of perverseness." "I should very much like to show it to my friend, Dr. Thorndyke," I replied. "He said he would be interested to read it and learn the exact provisions, and it might be well to let him and hear what he has to say about it." "I see no objection," she rejoined. "But you know what my father is. His horror, I mean, of what he calls cadging for advice gratis." "Oh, but he need have no scruples on that score. Dr. Thorndyke wants to see the will because the case interests him. He is an enthusiast, you know, and he put the request as a personal favor to himself." "That is very nice and delicate of him, and I will explain the position to my father. If he is willing for Dr. Thorndyke to see the copy, I will send or bring it over this evening. Have we finished?" I regretfully admitted that we had, and when I had paid the modest reckoning, we sallied forth, turning back with one accord into Great Russell Street to avoid the noise and bustle of the larger thoroughfares. "What sort of man was your uncle?" I asked presently, as we walked along the quiet, dignified street. And then I added hastily, "I hope you don't think me inquisitive, but to my mind he presents himself as a kind of mysterious abstraction, the unknown quantity of a legal problem." "My Uncle John," she answered reflectively, "was a very peculiar man, rather obstinate, very self-willed, what people call masterful, and decidedly wrong-headed and unreasonable." "That is certainly the impression that the terms of his will convey," I said. "Yes, and not the will only. There was the absurd allowance that he made to my father. That was a ridiculous arrangement, and very unfair, too. He ought to have divided the property up as my grandfather intended. And yet he was by no means ungenerous, only he would have his own way, and his own way was very commonly the wrong way. I remember," she continued, after a short pause, A very odd instance of his wrong headedness and obstinacy.